"You need a home and I need a mommy," said the little girl to the mail-order bride left at the station. Dakota Territory, winter 1887. Snow slashed down from the north, wild as claws. The platform groaned its boards slick with ice. The horizon was gone, swallowed in white. Linda Whitford stepped onto the frozen planks. One hand held her carpet bag, the other pinned her hat against the gale. Her coat, once dark green and neat, was dulled by travel, stiff at the hem with frost. She scanned the crowd. Faces hurried past, bent low, none familiar. The train gave a last piercing whistle. Then it was gone, lost to the storm. From the station doorway, the clerk called out. His breath curled white in the air. "You waiting on someone?" "Yes," Linda said, her throat raw. "Walter Briggs. He was supposed to meet me." The man shook his head. "Ain't seen him. If no one's coming, best move quick. Hotels are full. Boarding house, too. Weather like this, you don't linger." The words cut deeper than the wind. She had crossed half the country on nothing but letters and promises. Promises now broken, scattered like ash. Around her, the platform emptied. Boots stamped snow. Wagons creaked away. Soon only the wind remained shrieking through the sign above her head. She pulled her coat close, but the cold slid beneath it. It gnawed at her ribs, her resolve. Alone in a strange town. No welcome. No shelter. Perhaps no tomorrow. She turned back once toward the tracks, but the train was gone. No return. No escape. Only forward into a land that offered nothing. Her heart ached with more than frost. It was the ache of being left behind, abandoned, before her new life had even begun. Then movement. Two small figures stumbled through the snow. A girl tugging a younger boy. His boot bound with twine, his coat missing buttons. Their cheeks raw, their steps uneven, but their eyes fixed on her. They stopped in front of Linda. The girl's braid whipped loose in the storm. Her hands were bare red with cold, yet her chin lifted steady, her voice clear. "You need a home," she said, "and we need a mommy." Linda blinked, stunned. The boy, no more than 5, peeked from behind his sister's sleeve. Wide brown eyes, frightened yet full of hope. The storm howled on, snow stung her face. But for the first time that day, Linda was not invisible. "If you're still with me, tell me where are you listening from tonight, I'd like to know. Because these stories, they belong to all of us." And so it began, a woman stranded by broken promises, and 2 children bold enough to claim her as their own. Next we follow Linda as she must choose stand frozen and alone, or take the small chapped hand of a child who refuses to let her be forgotten. Sometimes justice doesn't wait for courts or guns. Sometimes it speaks through the raw voice of a child. The girl did not flinch under the storm. Her braid whipped loose, her hands bare and red, but her chin rose steady. "You need a home, and we need a mommy." Linda stared, stunned by the words. They cut sharper than the wind. They were not a plea alone, but a verdict, as if the storm itself had sent her here for this moment. The boy at her side clung tight, his boot bound with twine, his coat missing buttons. He peeked at Linda with wide brown eyes. Fear lived there. But so did defiance, a spark against the storm. "Where are your parents?" Linda asked, voice trembling. "Our ma's gone," the girl said plainly. "Our pa's name is Elias Monroe. He's got a farm past the cottonwoods. He's looking for a wife, but he's busy today. We've been waiting for a lady." "You'll do." The words landed heavy, simple, final. A judgment passed without trial. Linda's chest tightened. She had come all this way for a man who abandoned her. Yet here stood two children demanding justice for their own loss. Their mother stolen by death, their father swallowed by labor. They would not stand alone. They would not let Linda stand alone either. The girl folded her arms. "Well, he isn't here, is he? Pa's just not at the station. We came instead. If you stand here much longer, you'll turn to ice," her brother whispered, teeth chattering. "It's real cold, miss. Our house has a fire." The boy's voice was thin, but behind it lay something sharp, a refusal to be pitied, a hunger for what was fair. A home, a mother. A fight against the emptiness that had already taken so much. Linda looked at their hands, chapped, shaking, still reaching for her. She thought of the train gone east, the promises broken, the long road behind her. She thought of Walter Briggs, a coward hiding from his word. Then she thought of these children bold enough to stand in the storm, to face a stranger, to demand a future. Her gloved hand trembled, but slowly she reached out and set it into the girl's bare palm. The girl grinned, sudden and bright, as if a victory had been won. "I'm Annie. This is my brother Tommy." Linda Witford, she answered the name, sounding different now, steadier on her tongue. Annie tilted her head, repeating the name as if testing it against her father's shadow. "Pa will like that," she said with certainty. Linda felt the weight of it all, loss, betrayal, justice, waiting in silence. This was no rescue, no mercy. It was a choice, a trial by storm, and in that moment she chose. They stepped from the platform together, their boots crunching through new snow. The wind tugged at Linda's coat, but ahead through the cottonwoods, a thin line of smoke climbed into the gray sky. If justice could be found in this hard land, it might begin with a fire, a roof, and the raw courage of two children who refused to be left behind. And that path, rough and frozen, would carry her straight into the presence of Elias Monroe, a man carved by loss, whose silence held both danger and the possibility of something more. Not all battles are fought with bullets. Some are fought with silence, and silence can wound as much as steel. The cabin stood low and weathered smoke curling from its chimney. Its porch sagged at one corner, its roof silvered with frost. Annie pushed the door open without knocking, and warmth rushed out, firelight, the smell of bread, the heavy breath of a home still holding together. Linda stepped inside, stamping snow from her boots. Her eyes moved across the room. A long table worn smooth by years, shelves of jars and crockery, a braided rug curling at the edges, modest, spare, built by hands that had known labor loss and the slow rhythm of survival. The children darted forward, their chatter softening in the glow of the stove, and then came the sound of boots on packed snow. Heavy, deliberate. The doorway darkened. A man entered, tall, broad in chest and shoulder. His sleeves rolled through the cold, still clung to his hair. A scar traced one brow. His eyes, gray, steady, unreadable, swept once over Linda, not lingering, not hurried, and then settled into calm. "Pa, we brought her," Annie announced, proud, as if carrying home a prize. Linda straightened. Her carpet bag weighed heavy at her side. The man's gaze flicked to it, then to her face. No surprise. No welcome. Only that still gray calm. He nodded toward a chair near the stove. "Sit," he said. His voice was low-edged with gravel. "Eat." She obeyed because there was no other choice. He ladled soup into a thick bowl, set it before her. The steam rose rich with onions, carrots, slow-cooked meat. Linda bent her head, spoon trembling in her hand. The warmth spread through her chest with the first taste. Safety fleeting but real. The man returned to a bench near the wall. A block of wood. A carving knife. His hands moved slow, measured, curling shavings into pale ribbons. He did not ask who she was. He did not ask why she stood in his house. It was as though the storm outside had carried her here, and he would not question the will of it. The children whispered together, stealing glances at their father's face. He gave them nothing. Only the steady scrape of knife on wood, the fire's hiss, the faint sound of Linda's spoon against the bowl. It struck her then, this was no welcome of a man seeking a wife. No courtship, no promise. This was simply a man who saw a stranger freezing in the storm and opened his door. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet in his silence lay weight, a kind of judgment, a test. He had not spoken her name, but she felt already measured. Would she endure, would she leave? His silence held both shield and sword. Linda's hands tightened in her lap. She thought of the clerk's warning, of Walter Briggs's broken word, of the children's plea. And now this man, Elias Monroe, silent as stone, asking nothing, promising nothing, yet offering fire, soup, shelter. Justice in its simplest form. The silence was heavy but not cruel. It was the silence of a man who had already lost too much and feared the weight of more. For Linda, it was enough. For now. But silence cannot last forever. And the longer it lingers, the sharper it cuts. Soon that silence would be tested by whispers, by neighbors, by the storm of judgment waiting beyond the cottonwoods. Not every bond begins with vows. Some begin with a broom sweeping ashes or a pair of small hands reaching for a pencil. The mornings settled into silence. The stove cracked, the wind pressed at the shutters, and Linda rose before the children stirred. She swept the hearth-folded blankets neat at the bed's foot, set water to warm. The rhythm was simple, steady, like stitches pulling fabric together. Annie and Tommy tumbled in soon after, hair, tangled eyes bright. Linda mended trousers, patched shirts, darned socks by the window's gray light. Annie watched close, asking about letters, about words. Soon Tommy joined, pencil clutched in his small fist, scrawling crooked lines across scraps of brown paper. Linda bent low, patient, praising every smudge. Their laughter softened the walls. The cabin, once strangers' shelter, grew warm with sound. Elias spoke little. Most mornings he was gone before sunrise, out with the livestock, splitting wood, mending fence. Yet small signs marked his presence. A tin cup of coffee set at her place. The split heel of her boot stitched neat one evening. A wool scarf, worn but clean, hung on the peg by her chair. He gave nothing with words, only with hands. At night the children showed her wooden animals, Elias carved by firelight. A horse, its legs smooth and round. A bear with one ear short. A bird poised as if ready to fly. Linda set them on the windowsill where pale morning touched them. They made the cabin less a refuge, more a home. Yet outside eyes lingered. A rider slowed his horse when passing. A woman in a wagon looked once, then twice, lips tight. The glances carried weight. A silent question she could not yet answer. Linda felt it most in town. The hush when she entered the store. The sideways looks. The sharp glint in Mrs. Harrow's eyes as she counted coins, voice sweet with venom. That was quick, wasn't it, living under a man's roof without a ring? The words burned hotter than the stove. Conversation stilled, ears tilted. Linda's hand tightened around the counter edge. She whispered, steady, "We came for supplies." But her voice barely reached beyond herself. Elias said nothing. His jaw stayed set, his eyes lowered to the sack of seed in his hands. His silence was a wall she could not climb. They left with parcels and a weight heavier than flour. The ride home was wordless. Snow fell in slow flurries, settling on his hat, her skirt. Her chest clenched with the sting of silence. She had been abandoned once at a station. Now abandoned again, though not by absence, by his refusal to speak. That night, after the children slept, she stood by the fire, tea cooling in her hands. Elias worked at the table, mending a hinge. Metal scraped against metal. Finally, she said softly, "Silence can wound as much as words." He set the hinge down, eyes steady on hers. "I don't let other people's talk decide who stays in my home. Not an apology, not a promise, just a man's choice of battles." Linda turned back to the fire. The warmth touched her face, but inside she felt the chill of something deeper. A rhythm had formed, but it beat under judgment, under silence, under the weight of a world that would not forgive so easily. And it was that weight the children would soon carry when whispers in town turned to sharper words at school. Not every bond begins with vows. Some begin with a broom sweeping ashes or a pair of small hands reaching for a pencil. The mornings settled into silence. The stove cracked, the wind pressed at the shutters, and Linda rose before the children stirred. She swept the hearth-folded blankets neat at the bed's footset, water to warm. The rhythm was simple, steady, like stitches pulling fabric together. Annie and Tommy tumbled in soon after, hair, tangled eyes, bright. Linda mended trousers, patched shirts, darned socks by the window's gray light. Annie watched close, asking about letters, about words. Soon Tommy joined, pencil clutched in his small fist, scrawling crooked lines across scraps of brown paper. Linda bent low, patient, praising every smudge. Their laughter softened the walls. The cabin, once strangers' shelter, grew warm with sound. Elias spoke little. Most mornings he was gone before sunrise, out with the livestock, splitting wood, mending fence. Yet small signs marked his presence. A tin cup of coffee set at her place. The split heel of her boot stitched neat one evening. A wool scarf, worn but clean, hung on the peg by her chair. He gave nothing with words, only with hands. At night the children showed her wooden animals Elias carved by firelight. A horse, its legs smooth and round. A bear with one ear short. A bird poised as if ready to fly. Linda set them on the windowsill where pale morning touched them. They made the cabin less a refuge, more a home. Yet outside eyes lingered. A rider slowed his horse when passing. A woman in a wagon looked once, then twice, lips tight. The glances carried weight. A silent question she could not yet answer. Linda felt it most in town. The hush when she entered the store. The sideways looks. The sharp glint in Mrs. Harrow's eyes as she counted coins, voice sweet with venom. That was quick, wasn't it, living under a man's roof without a ring? The words burned hotter than the stove. Conversation stilled, ears tilted. Linda's hand tightened around the counter edge. She whispered steady, "We came for supplies." But her voice barely reached beyond herself. Elias said nothing. His jaw stayed set, his eyes lowered to the sack of seed in his hands. His silence was a wall she could not climb. They left with parcels and a weight heavier than flour. The ride home was wordless. Snow fell in slow flurries, settling on his hat, her skirt. Her chest clenched with the sting of silence. She had been abandoned once at a station. Now abandoned again, though not by absence, by his refusal to speak. That night, after the children slept, she stood by the fire, tea cooling in her hands. Elias worked at the table, mending a hinge. Metal scraped against metal. Finally, she said softly, Silence can wound as much as words. He set the hinge down, eyes steady on hers. I don't let other people's talk decide who stays in my home. Not an apology. Not a promise. Just a man's choice of battles. Linda turned back to the fire. The warmth touched her face, but inside she felt the chill of something deeper. A rhythm had formed, but it beat under judgment, under silence, under the weight of a world that would not forgive so easily. And it was that weight the children would soon carry when whispers in town turned to sharper words at school. If you're still listening, if you feel the sting of those whispers with Linda, let me know. If you like this story, type 1 in the comments. If you don't, type 0. Either way, I'd love to hear from you, because these stories, they belong to all of us. And as whispers turned into open wounds, it was Annie, bold, stubborn Annie, who would strike back first, carrying the weight her father refused to lift. Sometimes the fiercest defenders are not men with rifles, but little girls with fists too small for their fury. The note arrived folded, the ink hurried. From Mr. Callum at the schoolhouse. Elias read it without expression, his jaw tight. Annie got into a fight, bloodied a boy's lip. They want her kept home a week. When she returned, her braid half undone, her dress wrinkled and torn, she slipped past without a word. The weight of shame hung on her shoulders, heavier than her satchel. Linda waited until the house grew quiet, then asked softly why Elias's eyes hardened. The boy said, "You're just here to keep my bed warm." Annie told him to take it back. He didn't. So she made him. The words struck Linda like a blow. Her hands curled in her lap. She shouldn't have done that. "No," Elias said, voice low. "But she was defending you." Linda's breath caught. A child had fought where a grown man had stayed silent. She felt both pride and a crushing ache. Then I'm the reason she's in trouble. I've given them things to say about this family. Elias said nothing more, turning to wash his hands. His broad back filled the lamplight, his silence heavy as stone. That night, Annie stayed in her room. Tommy clung close to Linda, eyes wide, as if fearing the whispers might seep into the walls. The cabin creaked under the weight of things unspoken. Linda sat alone at her cot. Her carpetbag lay beneath it, never truly unpacked. She pulled it out, folding dresses with stiff hands. Maybe leaving was the only mercy. No more whispers. No more bruises for a child who shouldn't have to fight her father's battles. She gathered her shawl, her throat tight, but a flicker of light caught her eye through the window. She stepped to the door, careful, quiet. Elias sat on the porch, lantern at his side, Tommy's red scarf across his knees. The frayed edge lay open as he pushed a needle through wool, slow and steady. His shoulders leaned forward, his fingers careful with each stitch. He could have left it for her to mend. But he didn't. This was his work, his care. Linda watched from the doorway. He was a man who spoke with silence, who carried his grief like stone, who let his children defend what he himself would not. But in the careful loop of needle through wool, she saw another truth. He was still fighting not with fists or words, but with the steady patience of a man determined to keep what little he had left whole. Her grip on the shawl loosened. She set the carpetbag aside untouched. The storm inside her eased, if only for the night. For children, justice meant fists in a schoolyard. For Elias, justice meant quiet stitches in the dark. And for Linda, it meant choosing to stay when leaving seemed easier. But storms do not pass quickly on the frontier. Another would come fierce and blinding, and this time it would take Tommy straight into the heart of danger. A storm will test more than strength. It will strip you to the truth what you're willing to risk and who you're willing to die for. The wind rose that afternoon, sharp and howling. Snow drove sideways, rattling shutters, clawing down the chimney. Elias came in from the barn, ice crusting his coat. He brushed it off, voice low. "Stay in. I'll check the animals." Minutes later, he returned, stamping snow from his boots. Annie looked up from the table, frown deep. "Where's Tommy?" Elias turned confused. "I thought he was with you." Annie shook her head. "He went outside. Said he dropped something." Her voice faltered. "The little horse you carved him." Linda's heart seized. She grabbed her cloak from the peg. "The wind's too strong," Elias warned. "He'll hear me if he's frightened." "No," she said, voice steady. "He knows my voice." Their eyes locked, storm pressing against the walls. Then Elias lit a lantern, thrust it into her hands. "Check near the split cedar. That's where they play." The door burst open. The gale hit her like a wall, stealing breath, stinging skin. She bent her head into it, following faint boot prints half buried in drifts. Snow bit her cheeks, clung to her lashes, filled the silence with its roar. She called his name, but the storm swallowed it whole. Still, she pressed on, past the barn, across the yard, toward the cottonwoods bending under ice. At the split cedar, its trunk twisted like rope, she lifted the lantern high. Light swung wild, cutting the storm into shards. And there, near the half-frozen creek, a crouched shape, small, still. Tommy. He looked up, pale, wide-eyed wooden horse clutched in bare hands. His voice trembled. "I found it. But then I couldn't see the house anymore." Linda dropped to her knees, lantern sinking into the snow. She wrapped her cloak around him, pulling him close. His body shook, brittle with cold. "You're safe now," she whispered, steady though her pulse thundered. "We're going home." She lifted him into her arms. He was light as a bundle of sticks, but the wind fought her every step. Snow lashed her face. Her legs burned. Breath tore from her chest. Still, she moved step by step, the lantern bobbing ahead. She began to hum, then sing. An old hymn her mother once used in storms. The tune was thin, fragile against the gale, but Tommy's arms tightened around her neck. His breath warmed her skin. At last, through the blur of snow, the cabin. Windows glowing faint, a beacon in the dark. The door opened. Elias strode out, took the boy from her arms, shielding him with his coat. Inside, heat wrapped around them. Annie rushed forward, tears on her cheeks. Elias stripped Tommy's boots, rubbed life back into his feet. His gray eyes lifted to Linda. For the first time, they were not only steady, they were open, raw. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for bringing my boy back." Her arms ached, her skin burned, but beneath it was a warmth no fire could give. She nodded, unable to speak. Annie pressed the wooden horse back into Tommy's hands. He clutched it, smiling faintly. Linda's cloak lay damp over the chair, but she let it be. The storm still roared, yet in the glow of the fire, they were whole. But storms never end cleanly on the prairie. Come spring, the snow would melt, the roads would open, and with them would ride men like Arland Pike, carrying threats colder than any blizzard. Not every storm comes with snow. Some ride in on horseback, grinning with teeth sharp as steel. The thaw had just begun. Sheets flapped on the line, the last of the frost clinging stubborn to the shade. Linda folded linen, her fingers numb despite gloves. That's when she heard it, hoofbeats distant, but growing steady as a drumbeat of threat. 4 riders broke from the bend. Mud flew from their horses' hooves, slapping the fence like old wounds. At their head rode Arland Pike, tall in the saddle, his eyes cold, his smirk colder. His name carried weight in town-land disputes, debts collected by fist neighbors cowed into silence. They slowed at the yard. Linda stood tall on the porch, sheets still in her arms. "Well, well," Pike drawled. "Seems the talk is true. Living like a wife without a ring, raising another man's children. No paper to keep your name from the wind." Laughter rose from the men behind him, low and cruel. Linda's spine stiffened. She held the folded sheet like a banner. "I don't need paper to know where I belong." One rider snorted. Pike's smirk deepened. "Belong folks without roots get carried off sooner or later. And the wind here, Miss Witford, is stronger than you think." From the corner of her eye, Linda caught movement. Elias stepping from the barn. His axe rested in one hand, his eyes pale as river ice. He didn't shout. He didn't rush. He just stood, steady the storm of a man who would not bend. "Pike," he said, voice even. "If you came to talk about the south boundary, say it. If you came to insult someone in my house, turn your horse and go." Pike leaned back in his saddle, amused. "Boundaries can wait. This is about the town. They don't like irregular arrangements. A man living with a widow, children calling her ma. Makes people wonder. And when they wonder, the court listens. All it takes is the right voices." His men chuckled again. One spat into the mud. Another's hand hovered near his holster. Linda stepped down from the porch, boots crunching through thawed crust. She stopped close enough to see Pike's breath curl in the air. Her voice cut sharp. "Do you think a paper makes me fit to care for these children? I've gone into a blizzard to bring one home. I've mended their clothes, fed them, taught them. While you've done what, counted coin and spread poison." The yard stilled. Only the wind rattled branches. Pike's smile thinned. His horse sidestepped, uneasy. Then a crack of steel on wood. Elias drove the axe deep into a log. The sound rang like a shot. "She stays," he said. His voice was iron. "And if anyone thinks to use court or gossip to take this place, they'll stand here and say it to my face." The riders shifted. Uneasy glances passed. The laughter died. Pike's jaw worked. He jerked his reins, slush spraying the fence. Without another word, he wheeled his horse and rode hard for the road. His men followed, hoofbeats fading into the trees. Linda stood in the yard, breath fast, heart pounding. The sheet dropped from her arms, forgotten. Elias crossed to her, his voice low, carrying a warmth almost like a smile. "You didn't have to say all that." "Yes, I did," she answered, meeting his eyes. "I'm not running this time." The wind softened. For once, silence carried not distance but respect. But the fight for belonging was far from over. Soon, Elias would offer her not a ring, but something far humbler and far heavier than gold. Not every vow is spoken in church. Some are stitched into cloth worn thin by years and handed to another with trembling hands. Dawn came soft pale over the hills. Frost clung to the fence rails, glittering gold under first light. Linda swept the kitchen floor, the hush of the broom steady the stove ticking behind her. The cabin was still children's laughter, not yet awake. Then came the sound of boots, heavy measured. Elias stood in the doorway. His face unreadable, but his hands, they carried something folded, worn but clean. He stepped forward, held it out. A cotton apron faded, the ties softened by years of use. "It belonged to Mary," he said quietly. His voice broke the silence like the crack of a branch in deep woods. "She wore it every day." Until he stopped, throat tightening. Then his eyes steadied. "I don't have a ring to give you, but I've got land." my children, and the faith that you're the peace we've been missing." Linda's breath caught. She reached out, hands trembling. The fabric was warm from his hold, yet heavy with the weight of memory. She pressed it to her chest, tears welling, spilling before she could stop them. This was no jewel, no gold band. It was something far rarer: trust. A place in his home, in his heart, in the story of the family he'd thought finished. Her throat ached, but a smile broke through, born from a knowing deeper than words. "Then I'll wear it," she whispered. From the doorway of the children's room, Annie and Tommy peeked out, drawn by the stillness. They crept closer, eyes wide. Annie reached to touch the apron in Linda's hands. "Does this mean you're staying?" Linda knelt, meeting their gaze. "It means," she said softly, "I'm part of this family now." Annie's eyes shone. She threw her arms around Linda's neck, whispering fiercely, "Now you're our mama, no matter what the town says." Tommy wrapped his small arms around them both, and for a moment the world outside, its gossip, its threats, its cold, felt impossibly far away. Elias stood back, hands loose at his sides, pride and quiet relief flickering across his face. A man who spoke little, but who had just offered the heaviest vow he knew how to give. Linda tied the apron around her waist. The knot settled like an anchor, like roots driven deep. She looked to the window where pale light spread across the yard, touching the fence, the cottonwoods, the path that had carried her here. For the first time since the station, she did not feel like a visitor. She felt like she belonged. But the frontier is never still for long. Seasons shift, roads open. And even as Linda stood, rooted at last, another choice waited beyond the horizon, a final test of what home truly means. Spring came slow to Dakota. Snow melted in streaks, leaving earth soft and dark. Shoots of green broke stubborn through mud. The air carried the scent of thaw, of change. Linda stepped onto the porch, apron tied firm around her waist. In her hands, she carried two small carvings, birds of wood, their wings rough, their grain showing through. One carved by Elias, the other shaped by Annie and Tommy, together their small fingers guiding the knife, their laughter bright. She tied twine through each, hung them from a nail on the porch beam. The breeze caught them. They swayed gently, wings trembling, as if testing flight. Linda stood long watching. Morning sun spilled over the yard, touching fence rails, catching on the cottonwoods beyond. Chickens clucked near the shed. Annie's laugh rang from the yard where she chased Tommy through damp grass. Elias split wood in the distance, each swing of the axe steady sure. Her heart eased. The long winter she carried inside herself, a winter of broken promises, of silence, of whispers, began to melt. The birds turned in the wind, their shadows crossing her apron. Not a ring, not gold, but proof of belonging. Proof that what was broken could be mended. And yet, she knew the frontier never promised peace forever. Gossip might rise again. Men like Arland Pike would circle waiting for weakness. The land itself could turn cruel in a breath. But for now, in this moment, she was no longer a stranger. She was a root in this soil, a voice at this hearth, a mother to children who had chosen her before she had chosen herself. The wooden birds swayed their wings, whispering against one another. Rough, unfinished, but alive in the light. She touched them gently, and for the first time she whispered the word aloud, soft but certain. Home. Behind her, Annie called out, "Mama, come see Tommy's." Laugh followed, high and bright. Elias's axe struck wood, echoing steady as a heartbeat. Linda smiled. She stepped down from the porch, the sound of their voices carrying her forward. The birds swung above, turning with the wind, waiting, watching, ready to fly. The story doesn't end here. It never truly ends on the frontier. Every day brings a new test of love, of loyalty, of what it means to belong. And so the question is not whether storms will come. They will. The question is whether this family, stitched together by silence, sacrifice, and choice, will keep standing when the wind howls again. That answer lies ahead. Now tell me, if you had been in Linda's place that winter day, left alone on the platform, would you have taken the hand of a child who claimed you as their mother? Or would you have turned away fearing the weight of judgment? Leave your thoughts below. I want to hear your heart on this. Because stories like this, they don't just belong to the past. They belong to us all.